What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining. Please subscribe and like this video, and please share this video. Follow me on Instagram at Andrew Marlowe Artist Official, or send me an email at andrewmarlowe22@gmail.com. So today we are here for the full analysis of East of Eden. We blew through this last month, maybe a little over a month. So we're going to kind of contextualize it in the context of Christian history, historical history. Talk a little bit about Steinbeck. We'll be talking about the book of Genesis, as well as the very, very in-depth characters, protagonists, enemies in John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Please leave me a comment in the comments below if you guys have actually read this book. Maybe you've seen some of the movies. There was an original with James Dean. I haven't seen that one. I've seen the one with Jane Seymour. It was like a mini series. I was watching it the other night just to kind of get into the vibe of John Steinbeck's East of Eden. So let's talk a little bit about East of Eden. As you can see, it's very, very heavily annotated. It's definitely rather complex to read. There's a lot of characters, a lot of symbolism. There's a lot going on with the juxtaposition of Christianity, the book of Genesis, going alongside the sort of the modern retelling of that through Steinbeck's wonderful characters in here. Now, I'm definitely not an expert on Christianity or the book of Genesis. I did read the book of Genesis, and obviously when we're talking about Genesis, we're kind of starting with the Christian creation story, right? We're talking about Adam and Eve. We're talking about all those, detailed characters that sort of represent sin, and sin versus, faith, or faith versus religion, talking about the conquering of sin, the expulsion of sin, as well as the family structures is definitely heavily influenced by the book of Genesis. So let's kind of start from the beginning here. We're just going to kind of go through my notes, and I will hopefully be able to explain John Steinbeck's East of Eden to you and how you can approach it. So John Steinbeck doing a modern retelling of East of Eden. You could really read the novel independently in itself. You don't have to be an expert on the book of Genesis, and that's kind of where I started. I did read the book of Genesis, but when you actually go to kind of compare it with John Steinbeck's book, that's kind of a different sort of endeavor. And should you really do that in the first place, I think you should definitely be aware of the book of Genesis, right? But you don't have to necessarily compare it. It sort of exists as a novel, as a story, all on its own. And that's the cool part about it. There are some esoteric themes in here that we will discuss. So my, first sort of impressions of chapter 1. This is going to be a long video, guys. So make sure you guys grab some tea, grab your CBD, vape, whatever it is you got. Maybe you're eating some vegetarian lasagna or something. Maybe you got a nice cold beer like we're going to have in a little while here. So the first chapter, when you're dealing with Steinbeck, you're dealing with the Salinas Valley in Northern California. He's always creating these worlds, these universes of, sort of poor, middle-class, struggling people. There are some elites in East of Eden as well, but we're talking about sort of the farming culture at the turn of the century, going from sort of post-Civil War all the way up till maybe the 20s or the 30s, and that's kind of where East of Eden kind of begins, right? Now, the culture of the Northern California and the Salinas Valley is pretty complicated. They had some Indian wars at the turn of the century. They were still driving out the Native Americans. They had the sort of the post-Civil War stuff. Obviously, that wasn't the Deep South or anything like that. But we sort of have we still have the Union versus the Confederate struggles in California. And then we sort of have the almost the post-inspired, the post, what's his name? Thomas Hardy's-esque sort of universe where you have the farming culture sort of resistant to the ever-growing monster of technology, the Industrial Revolution, the results of the Industrial Revolution. So when you're dealing with Steinbeck, you're kind of putting that into context, right? You're kind of dealing with farmers or entrepreneurs, homesteaders, different things like that, sort of witnessing their culture being changed dramatically by the Industrial Revolution, by government, by banking systems, and all that stuff. So the first chapter kind of starts with the omnipresent narrator. Now, we never actually figure out exactly who he is. I don't think he's sort of somebody that's loosely involved in the family, or he's a member of the family, or perhaps it's Steinbeck himself. But there's an omnipresent narrator, and the first chapter just kind of takes us on this journey about the Salinas River culture and the beautiful landscapes, and Steinbeck kind of sets that scene for us, almost, sort of post Thomas Wolfe type stuff. I wrote here, there's an emphasis on man's relation with nature and the laws of nature. So you have man and nature. So obviously that's sort of a biblical theme, right? And that's kind of how you can approach the first couple of chapters. Now, when we get to chapter 2, he starts talking about the culture of how the Spaniards came to California, hundreds of years ago, and the struggles with the Native Americans versus the Spanish. We have native Spaniards and Americans. So those are sort of the three main cultures that are important to the Salinas Valley of Steinbeck's universe, right? Now, chapter 2 introduces the Hamiltons. Now, they are one of the main families that you will get to know in East of Eden. I've highlighted quite a bit here. Now, they're sort of like Presbyterian farm workers, and they're very involved in blacksmithing, farming, and in the Salinas Valley culture. So those are the two main characters in sort of chapter 2 that you will be aware of. You'll meet Liza Hamilton and Sam Hamilton, and those are sort of the early sort of protagonists. And then how East of Eden is structured. Obviously, you can see chapter 2, but within each chapter, there's like mini chapters. I'm not sure why he did that. I guess that's kind of biblical. But chapter 2 has 2 little sections. And in the second section of chapter 2, you will get to know Adam Trask just a little bit. That's Trask, Trask. So Adam Trask, I forgot what his relation is to the Hamiltons. I think maybe he just knows them or something, but he's he's the main protagonist, Adam Trask, and then you'll meet his brother Charles in chapter 3. So chapter 3 says Adam Trask was born on a farm on the outskirts of a little town, which was not far from the big town of Connecticut. So we're kind of jumping from the Hamiltons are very based in the Salinas River Valley of California, but then it jumps to Connecticut. We're kind of heading towards the eastern part of the country with this, right? Now, the first part of what Steinbeck tells us about the Trask family is that their father, there's some tensions with the father. His name is, Adam's father, Cyrus, was something of a devil, had always been wild, drove a two-wheeled cart too fast, and managed to make his wooden leg seem jaunty and desirable. So if you want to pick apart sort of the characters from the book of Genesis, now I can't really bring a lot of them to the top of my head, but Steinbeck, I definitely think, is sort of using some of those characters from the book of Genesis, and he's putting them in this, and they represent different things, right? But he's also creating a new modern retelling of the book of Genesis. And that's why we said prior to this part that you don't necessarily have to compare them. You should analyze them as entities of their own. And then we have Mrs. Trask. Mrs. Trask was a pale, inside herself woman. No heat of the sun ever reddened her cheeks, and no open laughter raised the corners of her mouth. So maybe sort of a religious, sort of traditional woman, doesn't really express a lot of emotion for some reason. Now it says Cyrus Trask mourned for his wife with a keg of whiskey and 3 old army friends. So Mrs. Trask died. What happened to her here? She got a disease. It says it was quite easy for her to attribute her condition to certain dreams she had experienced while her husband was away, but the disease was not punishment enough for her nocturnal philandering. Her new god was an expert in punishment. He demanded of her a sacrifice. So we have the biblical theme of sort of sacrificing something, whether it's her body, but she also sacrifices herself, sort of in her relationship with her sons. She searched her mind for some proper egotistical humility and almost happily arrived at the sacrifice herself. So she dies, I believe here. As the warm unconsciousness finally crept over her, she was thinking with some irritation of how her white lawn shroud would have mud down the front when they pulled her out in the morning, and it did. So Sirius, her husband, starts drinking every day, right? He's depressed. He dipped a rag in whiskey and gave it to the baby to suck, and after 3 or 4 dippings, young Adam went to sleep. So Adam, obviously we have Adam from the Bible, right? And now that's his son's name as well. And then his father, Sirius, sort of starts courting a young woman who's a daughter of a neighboring farmer. So then it starts to get into some introspection about Alice Trask. That was his wife. So you learn a little bit more about her. And then we sort of enter the relationship between Adam and Charles. It said Adam and little Charles would sit silent and respectful while their father explained how every general thought and planned where they had made their mistakes and what they should have done. So their father is a rather sort of hardened kind of guy. He almost lives like a secret life, and we sort of find out what he's involved in. We'll talk about that here. So by the time we get to, let's see here, page 21, we're on chapter 3 now, page 21. So there's something strange going on. I wrote Adam's interest and attraction towards Alice. So I think Alice is sort of like his stepmother, I want to say, but I'm not completely sure. So it says his brother Charles was kind of more athletic and stuff like that. And now his father's got like a wooden leg and all that stuff, which is kind of interesting. So I'm trying to find the part. Toward Alice Trask, Adam concealed a feeling that was akin to a warm shame. She was not his mother. So what does Steinbeck mean by that? I'm not exactly sure. She was not his mother. That he knew because he had been told many times. Not from things said, but from the tone in which other things were said. He knew that he had once had a mother and that she had done some shameful thing, such as forgetting the chickens or missing the target on the range in the woodlot. And as a result of her fault, she was not there. Adam thought sometimes that if he could only find what sin it was she had committed and why, he would sin it too and not be here. So we have the right off the bat, Steinbeck is sort of putting women in the context of sin, right? A lot of modern feminists would definitely not like this book because it does sort of explain the sinful nature of women that we're all very aware of, especially if we're men, right? So our good friend Steinbeck sort of introduces that to us. He talks about how Alice was rather docile towards Sirius, his father. She never really argued with him. She kind of just kept to herself. She took care of the kids and all that good stuff. Now, I wrote here tension between the brothers, Adam and Charles, because that's sort of when this begins. The affection between the two boys had grown with the years. It may be the part of Charles's feeling was contempt, but it was protective contempt. It all happened one evening. The boys were playing Pee-wee, a new game to them, in the dooryard. So Adam was not good at games, but some accident of the eye and timing, he beat his brother at Pee-wee. 4 times he drove the Pee-wee farther than Charles did. So his I think it's his little brother, or maybe they're twins. I can't remember. But he's sort of kind of one-upping his brother, right? And there's some tensions building. Charles moved slowly toward Adam, his eyes cold and non-committal. Adam edged away in terror. He did not dare to turn and run, for his brother could outrun him. He backed slowly away, his eyes frightened and his throat dry. Charles moved close and struck him in the face with his bat. Adam covered his bleeding nose with his hands, and Charles swung his bat and hit him in the ribs. So we have the theme of the ribs, Adam taking the rib from Adam to make Eve, right? And Charles swung his bat and hit him in the ribs, knocked the wind out of him, swung at his head and knocked him out. And as Adam lay unconscious on the ground, Charles kicked him heavily in the stomach and walked away. After a while, Adam became conscious. He saw Alice walking out, and there was something in her face that he had never seen before. He did not know what it was, but it was not soft or weak, and it might be hatred. She saw that he was looking at her, dropped the curtains into place, and disappeared. When Adam finally got up from the ground and moved and bent over into the kitchen, he found a basin of hot water standing ready for him to clean the towel inside. He could hear his stepmother coughing in her room. So his mother, this is like before she died. They're sort of going back in time, right? So his mother, I think, is dying of tuberculosis. He says here, he had always felt the danger in his brother, but now he understood that he must never win unless he was prepared to kill Charles. Charles was not sorry, he had simply fulfilled himself. Charles did not tell his father about the beating, and Adam did not, and surely Alice did not, and yet he seemed to know. In the months that followed, he turned to gentleness on Adam. His speech became softer towards him. So his father is aware of these latent tensions, these hidden tensions between his two sons, and he sort of starts to show favoritism towards Adam, I believe. So his father is pretty adamant about Adam becoming a soldier. Sirius explained softly to Adam the nature of a soldier, and though his knowledge came from research rather than experience, he knew and he was accurate. Sirius took Adam to walk with him one late afternoon, and the black conclusions of all his study and his thinking came out and flowed with a kind of thick terror over his son. I'll have you know that a soldier is the most holy of all humans because he is the most tested of all. I try to tell you, look now, in all the history men have been taught that killing of men is an evil thing, not to be countenanced. Any man who kills must be destroyed because this is a great sin, maybe the worst sin we know. But then he goes on to say, go out and kill as many of a certain kind of classification of your brothers as you can, and we will reward you for it because it is a violation of your early training. So that's what I wrote here. Adam's father, Sirius, telling his son Adam how to be a soldier and what it means to be a soldier. So he says here, they first will strip off your clothes, then they'll go deeper than that. Then they'll shuckle off any little dignity you have. You'll lose what you think of as of your decent right to live and to be let alone to live. They'll make you live and eat and sleep and shit close to other men. And when they dress you up again, you'll not be able to tell yourself from the others. You can't wear a scrap or pin a note on your breast to say this is me, separate from the rest. So he's talking about the indoctrination of the sort of the military industrial complex, right? And we have that because Adam is he's sort of doesn't really want to join the army, but he wants to appease his father. We sort of have that biblical theme of appeasing the father, right? Highlighted a bunch of stuff in here. So let's see here. So evidently, I told you guys earlier that his mother Alice was dying of tuberculosis, but I think she actually says Charles said harshly to his brother, "Your crazy mother drowned herself. Maybe she took a look at you. That would do it." So I think his mother did drown herself. I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure she did. For some reason, Steinbeck sort of sets it up like she's going to die from tuberculosis, so that she did die, but she was under the duress, under the stress and the sadness of her condition. She ends up drowning herself. So then we have a second fight between Charles and Adam on page 31. Now this is like the bad fight. Not going to talk about too much of the plot, but they get into another really bad fight. And Adam, let's see here. Adam made one desperate jump backward and raised his hand to guard his face. His brother moved precisely, each foot planted firmly. One fist lanced delicately to get the range, and then the bitter frozen work, a hard blow in the stomach, and Adam's hands dropped. Then 4 punches to the head. Adam felt the bone and the gristle of his nose crunch. He raised his hands again, and Charles drove at his heart. And all this time, Adam looked at his brother as the condemned looked hopelessly and puzzled at the executioner. Suddenly, to his own surprise, Adam launched a wild overhand, harmless swing which had neither force nor direction. Charles ducked in under it, and the helpless arm went around his neck. Adam wrapped his arms around his brother and hugged close to him, sobbing. He felt the square fist whipping nausea into his stomach, and still he held on. Time was slowed to him. With his body, he felt his brother move sideways, his force his legs apart, and he felt the knee come up, past his knees, scraping his thighs until it crashed against his testicles, and flashing white pain ripped and echoed through his body. So his brother basically beat the crap out of him again, kicked him in the ball sack. He's trying to assert his sort of dominance over his brother, right? For some reason. Now, there is a conversation here between Cirrus and Alice. I think this took place prior to her suicide or something. Or I think what's actually taking place here is that maybe they're from two different mothers, and that's what Charles is talking about when he said your crazy mother drowned herself. So he's talking about her real mother, I think. Maybe he's not talking about Alice. It's a little unclear there. So we'll just kind of have to fix our contradictions as we do this. So let's see here. Adam lay on the bed, a sheet pulled up to his waist, and Alice patted the cuts with a linen handkerchief. She was silent for a long time, and then she continued Adam's silence as though there had never been an interval. He doesn't think his father loves him, but you love him. You always have. So that's pretty much the bone of contention, right? That's the tension. Charles feels that his father is showing favoritism towards Adam, and that's kind of why he's beating up on his brother Adam. Then she tells Adam, he's a strange boy. You have to know him. All rough shell, all anger until you know. She paused to cough, leaned down and coughed, and when the spell was over, her cheeks were flushed. She was exhausted. You have to know him, she repeated. For a long time, he was giving me little presents, pretty things you wouldn't think he'd even notice. But he doesn't give them right out. He hides them where he knows I'll find them, and you can look at him for hours, and he won't ever give the slightest sign he did it. You have to know him. So, now after that, chapter 4, we're on chapter 4 now already. Adam joins the army to fight Native Americans. So we're fast forwarding maybe 10, 15 years into the future, right? So this is sort of when Adam, now Charles is just kind of out drinking and stuff. He's staying back home to sort of take over the farm for his parents and stuff. When Cirrus stumped out into the night, he was filled with a kind of despairing anger at Charles. He looked at the road for his son, and he went to the inn to look for him, but Charles was gone. So his father disapproves of what's kind of taking place. He wants both of his sons to kind of move in the right direction, right? But he knows Adam is kind of like the sacrificial son, right? His son Adam is the one that he's got high hopes for. So Adam joins the army to fight Native Americans. It has always seemed strange to me that it is usually men like Adam who have to do the soldiering. He did not like fighting to start with, and far from learning to love it, as some men do, he felt an increasing revulsion of violence. It was not nice work, but given the pattern of the country's development, it had to be done. So Adam goes reluctantly to fight the Native Americans. So Alice, let's see here. Charles wrote to his brother regularly, so he still has somewhat of a relationship with his brother, right? Charles wrote to his brother of the farm and the village, of sick cows and fouling mare, and of the added pasture and the lightning-struck barn, of Alice's choking death from her consumption, and his father's move, my light is making weird noises, move to a permanent pay position to the GAR in Washington. So let's just, I don't have we'll talk more about the GAR shortly here. So now, chapter 5, we move back to the Hamiltons and we get back to George. So now we're back in the Salinas Valley, I think. So we basically have the Trasks and we have the Hamiltons. Those are the two main characters that you need to know. I'm just going to kind of fast forward here. Nothing too important here. After Adam joined the army and Cirrus moved to Washington, Charles lived alone on the farm. He boasted about getting himself a wife, but he did not go about doing it the usual process of meeting girls, taking them to dances, or testing their virtues. The truth of it was that Charles was abysmally timid of girls, and like most shy men, he satisfied his normal needs in the anonymity of the prostitute. There is great safety for a shy man with a whore. Having been paid for and in advance, she has become a commodity, and a shy man can be gay with her and even brutal towards her. Also, there is none of the horror of the possible turn down which shrivels the guts of timid men. So I wrote, my annotation there says Steinbeck's red pill views, because we do have a lot of red pill kind of stuff with Steinbeck, It's not, I wouldn't say it's anti-woman or misogynist, but it's definitely borderlining on that if you want to sort of you know, that's probably what the postmodernists would say. But he's kind of like, you know, just kind of telling it like it is, and he's probably not doing this for the sake of his own viewpoints. He's doing this to kind of keep things in sort of a traditional biblical perspective, right? So Adam is out fighting Native Americans, and Charles is still back at the homestead in the Salinas Valley, just kind of hanging out with prostitutes and stuff. Now, it does say here that Charles, he missed his brother more than he missed his mother and father. He remembered quite inaccurately the time before Adam went away as the happy time, and he wanted it to come again. George's father George's elixir of life. So what's he talking about here? Not sure what he means by that. So he has like a love-hate relationship with Adam, right? And we'll kind of come to terms with that later on. So we do have the introduction of the mark of Cain here. Now, the wound had not worried Charles, but the scar did. So this is the, let's see here. There was a long torn welt on his forehead from hairline to a point between his eyebrows. For a few weeks, we're talking about Charles here. For a few weeks, his head was bandaged over a draining infection, but that did not worry him. In the day, pus was thought to be benign, a proof that a wound was healing properly. When the wound did heal, it left a long and crinkled scar. While most scar tissue was lighter than the surrounding skin, Charles's scar turned dark brown. Perhaps the bar had forced iron rust under the skin and was made of a kind of tattoo. Let's see here. So his brother is sort of doing construction on a stone wall. It says one large boulder was difficult to move. Charles pried at it with a long iron bar, and the rock bucked and rolled back again and again. Suddenly he lost his temper. A little smile came to his face, and he fought the stone as though it were a man. In silent fury, he drove his bar deep behind it and threw his whole weight back. The bar slipped, and its upper end crashed against his forehead. So we sort of have the biblical context of a man working with his hands, right? Like the ancient people from Jerusalem, or even Jesus Christ was a carpenter and all that. So he has an accident, and that's how he gets this sort of mark on his forehead. And to me, that is a possible representation of the mark of Cain, right? Sort of the evil brother that has the scar on his face. He says here, it looks, he wrote, like somebody marked me like a cow. The damn thing gets darker. By the time you get home, it will maybe be black. All I need is one going the other way, and I would look like a papist on Ash Wednesday. So this wound that Adam has is a result of his temper, or that Charles has, is a result of his anxiety, his temper, and his deep-seated sort of hatred for his brother. But he also, there's a real strong love there too. You know, this book is a really good representation of the brotherly tensions that sort of exist in families. So chapter 2 of chapter, whatever this is, chapter 2 of chapter 6, if that makes sense. Adam was discharged in 1885 and started to beat his way home. In appearance, he had changed little. There was no military carriage about him. The cavalry didn't act that way. Indeed, some units took on a sloppy posture. So his brother is getting discharged. He's disillusioned with the army. He doesn't want to fight Native Americans any longer. So Adam is in the army in chapter 7. We're fast forwarding to chapter 7 here. Still got a long way to go. So Adam is still in the army fighting Seminoles, basically. Seminoles are a Native American tribe. Talks a little bit about them. So now we do have this pretty interesting explanation. I wrote race relations in the context of migrants. So Steinbeck sort of gives us sort of this, sprawling introspection about the relationships between the migrant workers and the government and the IWW, and sort of these military industrial. It even talks about the relationships with blacks. He says the Negroes were poor enough to be kind, but they could not trust any white man, no matter how poor, and the poor white man had a fear of strangers. So we're dealing with a lot of racial relations here in the context of the turn of the century, 1880s, going, this is all post sort of Reconstruction type stuff, right? Sort of similar to what we talked about in some of the other novels. And then Adam sort of something happens. He gets discharged, and then I forgot what happened, but he's sort of on the run, and and he gets put into a chain gang. And on page 58, he escapes the chain gang. So Charles received very few letters during this time. Sometimes he did not inquire at the post office for weeks. In February of 1894, when a thick letter came from a firm of attorneys in Washington, the postmaster thought it might be important. He walked out to the Trask farm, found Charles cutting wood, and gave him the letter. So I think we're back in Connecticut now, or yeah, something like that. He walked out to the Trask, and since he had taken so much trouble, we waited around to hear what the letter said. We're back in Salinas Valley, I'm sorry. But the letter is from Washington. Okay, so the postmaster in California sort of wants to hear what this is all about. The postmaster called after him. Anything wrong, Mr. Trask? My father is dead, Charles said. He walked into the house and closed the door. So Cyrus Trask is now dead. Now here's where we get into the Freemasonry that Steinbeck offers us. Now, this is probably the 9th or 10th novel we've read with Freemasonic imagery. We had Somewhere in Time, we had War and Peace, we had Dostoevsky, I think, even had some cult Freemasonry, so we're going to talk about that. There hadn't been anyone to send him a telegram. The attorneys had found his address among his father's papers. They felt very different about Mr. Trask then. People with that much money were rich. They would never have to worry. It was enough to start a dynasty. The lawyers congratulated Charles and his brother Adam. So his father basically dies and leaves them a huge inheritance on his will. Under the will, they said it was to be shared equally. After the money, they listened to the personal effects of the deceased. 5 ceremonial swords presented to Cyrus at a various GAR conventions, an olive wood gavel with a gold plate on it, a Masonic watch charmed with a diamond set in the dividers, the gold caps from the teeth he had out when he got his plates, and so forth. So let's see here. Of course, he thought of little else, but it was a dull circular thinking that came back to the starting point. Where had he gotten it? Where did he get all this money? He kind of wants to know. So Adam and Charles's father, Cyrus, was in sort of this military-industrial Freemasonic group. Now, the GAR, I think I jotted it down some here. Let's see here. The GAR is the Grand Army of the Republic. It was basically a sort of a Freemasonic organization started for veterans of the Confederacy, right? So his father was a Confederate soldier, evidently. Was sort of had these shady dealings going on with the GAR in Washington. So that's what's taking place now. The father is dead. Now we have some more mentions of the mark of Cain and sort of the relationship and the tensions, going on. Now his brother comes back to Adam came walking from the village. His shirt was dirty and the stolen clothes were, so he sneaks off the chain gang and somewhere lands himself back in the Salinas Valley and goes back to the farm. I want to say we're in the Salinas Valley, but I can't remember. The farm might actually be in Connecticut, I think, or maybe near Washington. So I might be mistaken on some of that. Like I said, the plot is kind of all over the place. Let's see here. So they're talking about their father's involvement in the sort of Freemasonic GAR, right? He says, no, in Washington. I got a letter in newspapers, carried him on a caisson with a flag over it. The vice president was there, and the president sent a wreath and all the papers, pictures too. I'll show you. So his brother is telling his other, I think it's Charles filling Adam in on their father's involvement in this sort of Freemasonic GAR cult. Then we talk about, he mentions the mark of Cain again here. Now, then Adam admits to never loving his father and the state of the farm. He says, no, I didn't love him. Sometimes he scared me. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes I admired him, but most of the time I hated him. Now, tell me what you want to know. I loved him, said Charles, and for the first time that Adam could remember, Charles began to cry. He put his head down on his arms and cried. It was not a pretty farm near their house, never had been. There was so he's talking about sort of the farm is this empty vessel of emotions and anxieties. Let's see here. I don't know, said Adam. I don't know. No one ever said it. Look what he got to be. Stayed overnight in the White House. The vice president came to his funeral. Does that sound like a dishonest man? So now there's some questions about what his father's involvement was in the GAR sort of organization, as well as how his father got all this money. It turns out, we'll talk more about it later, but his father was sort of stealing the money or somehow got it illegally. Now there's some trauma with Adam fighting Indians and, living homeless and stuff. So his brother Adam's kind of been through the ringer. So there are some links to, he held jobs in the GAR, big jobs. He maybe could have got into the treasury and rigged the books. The vice president came to his funeral. The president sent a wreath. So I told you guys about that. Let's see here. Then it would come out how he never would. So his father claimed to be in this cult, and they were involved in the treasury. He was like really close with the vice president. They don't mention who the president was during that time, but this is like post-Civil War. And the brothers are sort of, Adam seems to suspect that his father maybe never earned all these, battalions, never earned all these credentials that he supposedly was awarded. But Charles doesn't believe it. Charles says that, our father was honorable. He must have done something good. He was in with this sort of Freemasonic organization. Where would he have gotten these credentials? Where did he get the money if they didn't give it to him lawfully? So there's some more views on Steinbeck's sort of red pill views. Not sure where they are. I wrote Steinbeck's views on love and women. So I think his brother Adam is sort of trying to convince his brother Charles to stop hanging out with prostitutes or something. So chapter 8, now we're introduced to Kathy, who is played by Jane Seymour in the miniseries. I forgot who she was played by in the original 1950s version. But Kathy is sort of the reversal character of Eve, right, from the book of Genesis. Let's see here. I believe there are monsters born. This is the omnipresent narrator talking. I believe there are monsters born in the world to human parents. Some you can see misshapen and horrible with huge heads of tiny bodies. Some are born with no arms, no legs, some with 3 arms. They are accidents and no one's fault, and as used to be thought. Once they were considered the visible punishment for concealed sin. So Kathy is basically, it is my belief that Kathy Ames was born with the tendencies or lack of them which drove and forced her all of her life. Some balance wheel was misweighted, some gear out of ratio. She was not like other people, never was from birth. And just as a cripple may learn to utilize his lack so that he becomes more effective. These annotations are ripping up my pages here. In a limited field than the uncrippled, so did Kathy, using her difference, made a painful and bewildering stir in her world. There was a time when a girl like Kathy would have been called possessed by the devil. She would have been exorcised to cast out the evil spirit, and after many trials that did not work, she would have been burned as a witch for the good of the community. So Kathy is basically this controversial character, right? And we sort of learn a little bit about her upbringing, her background. So he describes Kathy in almost this childlike way. She says, Kathy always had a child's figure even after she was grown, slender, delicate arms and hands, tiny hands. Her breasts never developed much. Before her puberty, the nipples turned inward, whatever that means. Her mother had to manipulate them out when they became painful in Kathy's 10th year. Her body was a boy's body, narrow hips, straight leg, but her ankles were thin and straight without being slender. Her feet were small and round and stubby with fat insteps, almost like little hoofs. So, like, is she deformed? Like, what is he talking about? She was a pretty child and she became a pretty woman. Her voice was huskily soft and it could be so sweet as to be irresistible. So we're sort of introduced to the seductress, this creepy woman that's born that looks like a boy, but she's really a woman. Now let's see here. Kathy learned when she was very young that sexuality, with all its attendant yearnings and pains, jealousies and taboos is the most disturbing impulse humans have. And in that day, it was even more disturbing than it is now because the subject was unmentionable and unmentioned. Kathy learned that by the manipulation and use of this part of people, she could gain and keep power over nearly everyone. It was at once a weapon and a threat. What freedom men and women could have were they not constantly tricked and trapped and enslaved and tortured by their sexuality? So Steinbeck's got the woes and the struggles of sexuality down to a science, right? And I relate to that. He's definitely right about that. At 10 years old, Kathy knew something of the power of the sex impulse and began coldly to experiment with it. She planned everything coldly, foreseeing difficulties and preparing for it. So we almost have sort of a Lolita-esque type deal here where he's almost sexualizing a young girl's sexuality. So, was Steinbeck some kind of, creeper, Skittles guy or something? That could be possible. The sex play of children has always gone on. Everyone, I guess, who is not abnormal has foregathered with little girls in some dim leafy place in the bottom of a manger, under a willow, in a culvert, under a road, or at least have dreamed of doing so. I haven't dreamed of doing that, Steinbeck. I'm not sure if you have. But he's sort of talking about the viewpoint of, how children are sinful, how young children are sinful. But he's also talking about the perspective of sexuality from this deranged viewpoint of a weird child too, right? So basically Kathy is in the barn or somewhere, and she basically seduces two boys. Says here, seen in the barn with Kathy, then they are, okay, so Kathy sort of seduces, or maybe they were, accosting her. We're not really sure. I'm pretty sure Kathy is very aware of what's going on, and she's very aware of her own sexuality. So Steinbeck sort of writes this scene about these two guys, these two young boys that sort of have their hands up her skirt, and then Kathy's parents, or Kathy's mother or aunt, or I think it's her mother, Mrs. Ames, her mother sort of comes in and is, sees what her daughter is up to. Now, Mrs. Ames settled down to a steady hysteria. She had been there. She had seen. She was the final authority. And out of her hysteria, a sadistic devil peered. She wanted blood. And Kathy was only 10 years old. If the boys had owned up to the crime, they might have escaped some of the punishment. Their refusal brought a torturing rage, not only to their fathers who did the whipping, but to the whole community. Both boys were sent to a house of correction with the approval of their parents. So they get whipped really bad, and Kathy is sort of sadistically or masochistically getting off on seeing these two boys punished that she kind of seduced in the first place. At least that's the way it's presented in the film, right? With Jane Seymour. So as they're being whipped, says Kathy developed a little smile, just a hint of a smile. She had a way of looking sideways and down that hinted to a lone boy of secrets he could share. In her father's mind, other questions stirred, and he shoved it down deep and felt dishonest for thinking about it all. Kathy had remarkable luck in finding things: a gold charm money, a little silken purse, a silver cross with red stones said to be rubies. Kathy's father was a covered man. He rarely told his thoughts on his mind. So Kathy's own parents, at least her father, is kind of suspicious of how all this kind of took place and unfolded, and what his daughter's role was in this. And he's sort of seeing his own daughter as this creepy sort of sociopath. So now Kathy starts to rebel because she starts reading Alice in Wonderland. Now, Alice in Wonderland is a labyrinth of sort of cultic, weird sort of esoteric themes, right? And her mother catches her reading it. She says, "Oh, Alice in Wonderland, you're too big for that." Kathy said, "I can get to be so little you can't even see me." So she's sort of referring to Alice in Wonderland when Alice sort of shrinks, and all that stuff. "What in the world are you talking about? Nobody can find me," her mother said angrily. "Stop making jokes. I don't know what you're thinking of. What does Miss Fancy think she is going to do?" "I don't know yet," said Kathy. "I think I'll go away." You just lie there, Miss Fancy, and when your father comes, he'll have a thing or two to say to you. Kathy turned her head very slowly and looked up at her mother. Her eyes were expressionless and cold, and suddenly Mrs. Ames was afraid of her daughter. So we're seeing the unveiling of a sort of a sociopath here. And then we sort of get this introspection about her father, Mr. Ames. Now, I wrote something here. Where is this taking place? Unclear. Steinbeck, although his writing is good, there's parts where he sort of jumps back and forth, and you don't quite know who or what or where he's talking about or where something's taking place. So just a little sort of aesthetic criticism there of Steinbeck. So basically, Kathy ends up committing arson. Says here, the fire broke out at about 3 o'clock in the morning. It rose, flared, roared, and crashed. The Ames house had gone up like a rocket. So Kathy basically kills her parents in a house fire. Crazy, right? The volunteers in the ordinary audience, fires attract, looked around at the lighted faces trying to see Mr. and Mrs. Ames and their daughter. It came to everyone at once that they were not there. People gazed at the board, the broad ember bed, and saw themselves and their children in there, and their hearts rose up and pumped out against their throats. The volunteers began to dump water on the fire, almost as though they might even so late save from corporeal part of the family. The frightened talk ran through the town that the whole Ames family had been burned. By noon, the coroner was able to throw wet planks down and probe with a crowbar among the sodden heaps of charcoal. Enough remained of Mr. and Mrs. Mr. and Mrs. Ames to make sure there were 2 bodies. So Kathy killed her parents, so she's definitely a sociopath, right? Let's see here. So now we're sort of talking about the Edwards family. I forgot exactly who they were. I think Mr. Edwards is the owner of the whorehouse, right? So, let's see here. So Catherine kind of grows up. I think we're fast forwarding time here. I don't know how Kathy Ames heard about Mr. Edwards. Perhaps a hack driver told her. The word got around when a girl really wanted to know. Mr. Edwards had not had a good morning when she came into his office. The pain in his stomach he ascribed to a halibut chowder his wife had given him for supper the night before. So for this reason, he did not take in all at once the girl who called herself Catherine Ainsbury. So Catherine basically goes to Mr. Edwards trying to get a job at his whorehouse. And he is very, very seduced by her. He says, and here he was, a big fat grown-up. Let's see here. Here he was, a big fat grown-up whoremaster, leaning his stomach against his desk while his cheeks darkened with blood and excited chills ran up his legs and thighs. So he's very seduced by Kathy. He's almost cucking towards her. And he sort of tries to dissuade her. Like in the film, they did a really great job with Jane Seymour. And I forgot who the actor was that played Mr. Edwards. But he's like this old, sort of disheveled, drunken, guy that looks like he smoked too many cigarettes and drank too much whiskey or something. And he's kind of like this pathetic character. And then when Kathy sort of enters, and he's totally beguiled by her, even though she wants to become a whore, right? He's totally beguiled by her, and he sort of tries to talk her out of becoming a prostitute because he's like so infatuated with her. He's like, "You're too good for this, right?" For Mr. Edwards, as cold-blooded a whoremaster as ever lived, had fallen hopelessly and miserably in love with Catherine Ainsbury. Mr. Edwards had never experienced such misery. As a matter of business, he had learned so much about women that he did not trust one for a second. Got some more Steinbeck red pill stuff. And since he deeply loved Catherine, and love requires trust, he was torn to quivering fragments of his emotions. He had to trust her And at the same time, he did not trust her. He tried to buy her loyalty with presents and with money. When he was away from her, he tortured himself with the thought of other men slipping into her house. He hated to leave Boston to check up on his units because he would leave Catherine alone. To a certain extent, he began to neglect his business. It was his first experience with this kind of love, and it nearly killed him. In their sexual relations, she convinced him that the result was not quite satisfactory to her, and if he were a better man, he could release a flood of unbelievable reaction in her. Her method was to keep him continually off balance. So we have this coquettish, sort of monstrous, evil female character that is sort of seducing this man, and she's kind of pushing and pulling. He's not getting laid. Let's say that much. She maybe will kiss him or let him fondle her or something, but she pulls back right when he's becoming aroused, right? Mr. Edwards was essentially a simple man, but even a simple man has complexities which are dark and twisted. Catherine was clever, but a clever woman misses some of the strange corridors in a man. So now Kathy starts to become introduced to alcohol, and she sort of warns him, don't let me drink. This stuff is going to make me off my rocker, right? Now they're starting to drink together. And then she basically goes ape shit on him. Her character just switches like that. She spoke to him softly. You fat slug, she said. What do you know about me? Do you think I can't read every rotten thought you ever have? Want me to tell you? You wonder where a nice girl like me learned tricks? I'll tell you. I learned them in cribs, you hear? Cribs. I've worked in places you never even heard of. 4 years. Sailors brought me little tricks from Port Said. I know every nerve in your lousy body, and I can use them. So in the film, Jane Seymour does a wonderful scene where she's drinking wine with him, and she gets drunker and drunker, and it says her eyes became set and cold. And she basically she's holding her wine glass or whatever it is. She starts turning in circles and just berating this guy, and this guy is like, what is going on? But he's so beguiled, but he realizes he's being completely humiliated by this woman. He was afraid of her, but he sat still. Directly in front of him, she drank the last champagne in her glass, delicately struck the rim on the table, and jammed the ragged edge against his cheek. And then he did run from the house and heard her laughing as he went. So you kind of have to watch the movie with Jane Seymour to kind of get a closer view what's going on here. Love to a man like Mr. Edwards is a crippling emotion that ruined his judgment, concealed his knowledge, weakened him. Steinbeck is like right on the money when it comes to falling in love or being seduced by a woman here. He told himself that she was hysterical and tried to believe it, and it was made easier for him by Catherine. Her outbreak had terrified her, and for a time she made every effort to restore his sweet picture of her. So he's basically like getting railroaded by Kathy, but he's so much in love with her, he's just like in total awe. So Catherine ends up committing another arson, possibly. Now we do have this scene where he tries to, Mr. Edwards is fed up with Catherine, right? And he threatens to whip her, and she says, "You're not going to whip me." This is a scene in the movie. Basically, he beats the crap out of her. That he had not killed Catherine was an accident. Every blow had been intended to crush her. She was a long time unconscious and a long time half conscious. She realized her arm was broken and that she must find help if she wanted to live. So now, we're on page 99 going into chapter 10, right? Now, this is when, slowly, after this chapter, sort of the element of sin is introduced to Adam and Charles Trask under the guise of Kathy. Kathy stumbles on their porch one evening here. They're still arguing about money. They're arguing about whether they should move, whether they should keep the farm or whether they want to move to the Salinas Valley or something. And there's a lot of references to food here and cutting bread and butter. So we have that sort of biblical thing, right? It was 8 months before Charles saw him again. Charles took off somewhere. I don't remember what happened. So they're both living in Boston, and they're dreaming of going to California, right? Now, let's see here. Now, they get into a real brutal argument here. I forgot what they're talking about, but Adam is sort of Charles is becoming desensitized and sort of fed up with Adam's progressive views or whatever. Charles is more like a traditionalist. He wants to stay and work on the farm, and Adam has all sort of these lofty views. Charles's eyes blaze. "I'll burn your goddamn house down." "I believe you would," Adam said, suddenly sobered. "I believe you really would. What are you looking like that for?" So they're arguing here. Then Adam confesses to his brother that he escaped from the chain gang and all that stuff. So this is the creepy part. Chapter 11, Kathy shows up at their doorstep, right? Catherine arrives at Adam and Charles's door. Let's see here. A little dirty bundle of rags and mud was trying to worm its way up the steps. One skinny hand clawed slowly at the stairs. The other dragged helplessly. There was a caked face with cracked lips and eyes peering out of swollen, blackened lids. The forehead was laid open, oozing blood black into the matted hair. Adam went down the stairs and kneeled beside the figure. "Give me a hand," he said. "Come on, let's get her in here. Look out for the arm. It looks broken." She fainted when they tried to carry her in. "Put her in my bed," Adam said. "Now I think you better go for the doctor. Don't you think we better hitch up and take her in?" "Move her? No, are you crazy?" "Maybe not as crazy as you. Think about it a minute. For God's sake, think about what? 2 men living alone and they got this in their house?" Adam was shocked. "You don't mean it." "I mean it all right. I think we better take her in. It'll be all over the county in 2 hours. How do you know what she is? How'd she get here? What happened to her?" "Adam, you're taking an awful chance." So Adam is already beguiled by this creature, right? Just like Mr. Edwards was, completely unaware of what this woman is capable of. So basically Charles like storms off or something. He's pissed off, and Adam is kind of he's taking care of Kathy. And now in the movie, it's real freaky. If you watch the way Jane Seymour portrays this part, it's real creepy. She's like this feral animal. It's like gives me chills even just to think about it. I definitely recommend getting a copy of the 1981 edition of East of Eden. It's available on DVD. It's not really streaming anywhere. So Kathy arrives at the doorstep, and now that obviously Charles and Adam, they already got all these terrible tensions between them, right? But it gets exacerbated by this presence of Kathy. She was very badly hurt. Charles and Adam fight over keeping Kathy there. So we're just going to fast forward here. She's basically all doped up on opium. The doctor came over to figure out what's going on. She studied Charles's dark soulness. He had something in his face that she recognized and made her uneasy. She saw that he touched the scar on his forehead very often, rubbed it, and drew its outline with his fingers. Once he caught her watching. He looked guiltily at the fingers. Charles said brutally, "Don't you worry, you're going to have one like it, maybe even a better one." She smiled at him. He looked away. When Adam came in with her warm soup, Charles said, "I'm going into town and drink some beer." So Adam is falling in love with Kathy, right? And Kathy is pretty aware of this. You know, Kathy is very receptive. I mean, she knows that Adam is the one that's taking to her, but she's trying to beguile. She's trying to seduce his brother, Charles. So we have the theme of sin and lust and all this stuff that's taking place between the brothers. Adam couldn't even remember having been so happy, so he's totally cucking over this girl he barely knows. It didn't bother him that he did not know her name. She had said to call her Kathy, and that was enough for him. He looked for Kathy, going through recipes used by his mother and his stepmother. Or it says he cooked for Kathy. Kathy's vitality was great. She began to recover, all this stuff. So he wants to kind of move out with Kathy or get her out of there or something because he's afraid of what his brother is going to do. Charles had frightened her badly. And if he had recognized her, so had she recognized him. He was the only person she had ever met who played it her way. Kathy followed his thinking and did not reassure her. She knew that her tricks would not work with him and she needed protection and rest. Her money was gone. She had to be sheltered and would have to be for a long time. She was tired and sick, but her mind went skipping among possibilities. So she claimed to lose her memory or something early on. Now she says, Adam, I didn't really lose my memory. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Did you love your father, Adam? I guess I revered him more than loved him. Well, if someone you revered were in trouble, wouldn't you do anything to save him from destruction? Well, sure, I guess I would. Oh, you understand so much. Tears welled up in her eyes. He leaned toward her again and she kissed him softly on the cheek. Don't you worry, he said. I'll take care of you. Well, your brother doesn't like me. He wants me to get out of here. Did he tell you that? Oh no, I just can feel it. He hasn't your understanding. He has a good heart. I know that, but he doesn't have your kindness. So she's basically playing Adam, completely playing him, because she's fully aware of Charles. She's kind of afraid of him because he's sort of like maybe the authoritative, resistive type, but she's also aware of how she can play Charles against his brother Adam. So that's kind of what's creepy about it. Sadly, he knew joy and sorrow, felt it into one fabric. Courage and fear were one thing too. He found that he had started to hum a droning little tune, and he turned to walk through the kitchen and stood in the doorway looking at Kathy. She smiled weakly at him, and he thought, what a child, what a helpless child, and a surge of love filled him. Will you marry me, he asked. Her face tightened and her hand closed convulsively. You don't have to tell me now, he said. I want you to think about it, but you could marry me and I could protect you. No one could ever hurt you again. So it's very cute. He's trying to like marry this woman because he loves her and she got the crap beat out of her, but he has no idea what her intentions are or what actually transpired. Ask you to marry me. Why shouldn't I? He says. It's not that. I want this night to think. I'll want maybe more than this night. Maybe you let me do that. She raised her hand to her head. You know, I'm not sure I can think straight, and I want to. So, Adam proposes to Catherine, right? And he's still trying to. And then Charles comes back. We lost our place here. Charles straightened back up when Adam approached. He put his palms against the small of his back and massaged the tired muscles. My God, there's a lot of rocks, he said. So his brother's out working or something. So his brother is kind of obviously doesn't want him to marry Catherine. He thinks it's way too soon. 5 days later, when Charles had gone to buy some calf feed, Adam drove the buggy to the kitchen steps. He helped Kathy in. Tucked a blanket around her knees and put another around her shoulders. He drove to the county seat and was married to her by a justice of the peace. So she did end up giving in and marrying him, it looks like. We got married, Adam said simply. Kathy smiled at Charles. Why did you do it? Why not? Can a man get married? Kathy went quickly to the bedroom and closed the door. Charles began to rave. She's no damn good, I tell you. She's a whore. His brother says, stop, Charles, or something. I tell you, she's just a two-bit whore. I couldn't trust her with a bit piece. Why, that bitch, that slut, he says. Charles, stop it, I tell you. You keep your filthy mouth shut about my wife. She's no more of a wife than an alley cat. Adam said slowly, I think you're jealous, Charles. I think you wanted to marry her. Why, you goddamn fool, Charles says. Me jealous? I won't live in the same house with her. It's kind of cute how he's like being so mean to her. Adam said evenly, you won't have to. I'm going away. You can buy me out if you want. You can have the farm. You always wanted it. You can stay here and rot. Charles's voice lowered. Won't you get rid of her? Please, Adam, throw her out. She'll tear you to pieces. She'll destroy you, Adam. She'll destroy you. So we have that classic theme that we're all aware of a woman kind of comes along and tears two brothers apart, right? So that's kind of what's taking place here. And you have to sort of be aware of the peripheral biblical themes of the activities, the chopping of the wood, the cutting of the bread, the resistance towards sin, lust, all that good stuff. And then, let's see here. Charles is sore or something. He's got backaches or I forgot what happens, but he's sick. And Catherine ends up giving him medicine where she seduces him. Well, you drank my sleeping medicine. Maybe you wouldn't wake up easily. Adam went down with a heavy opium sleep, though he fought to stay awake. Did the doctor tell you to take this much? He asked thickly. You're not just used to it, she said. Charles came back at 11 o'clock. Kathy heard his footsteps. He went into his room, flung off his clothes, and got into bed. He grunted and turned to get comfortable. And when he opened his eyes, Kathy was standing by his bed. What do you want? What do you think? Move over a little. So Kathy is getting into bed with Charles now. Where's Adam? He drank my sleeping medicine by mistake. Moreover, a little. He breathed harshly. Okay, so before, I got that mixed up. She actually gives sleeping medicine to Adam. She knocks Adam's out, knocks her Charles's brother Adam out so she can go in Charles's bed and seduce him. He breathed harshly. I already been with a whore, he said. You're a pretty strong boy. Move over a little. How about your broken arm? I'll take care of that. It's not your worry. Suddenly Charles laughed. The poor bastard, he said, and he threw back the blanket to receive her. I wrote this here. Catherine manipulating the brothers through fear and mixed signals, possibly secret desire for Charles. Adam then seduces him. So pretty raunchy stuff, almost incestual. So now we're on to part 2, page 129. Now we get sort of these introspective, sprawling rhetoric scenes of Steinbeck's views on the passage of time. See here. The omnipresent narrator is talking into chapter 13. We almost have a Tolstoyan influence here. I'm not sure what made me come to that conclusion. Tolstoyan influence. Now, the way that he sort of breaks down the characters with introspection and rhetoric is very Tolstoyan. It's almost like War and Peace. You have strong sections of dialogue, and then you have like introspection. We talked about that. That's really, in my opinion, the best way to write a novel is have introspective, sprawling, descriptive rhetoric juxtaposed with character action. The long Salinas Valley was part of the exploitation. Adam had seen and studied a fine color broadside which set forth the valley as the region. So they're kind of being beguiled by the Salinas Valley, and they move out there. Adam and Kathy moved to the Salinas Valley, and Kathy... Okay, so let's see here. So Kathy does become pregnant. See here. He had only one worry, and that was Kathy. She was not well. She rode around the country with him, but she was listless. One morning, she complained of feeling ill and stayed in her room in the King City Hotel while Adam drove into the country. He returned about 5 in the afternoon to find her nearly dead from loss of blood. Luckily, Adam found Dr. Tilson at his supper and dragged him from his roast beef. The doctor made a quick examination, inserted a packing, and turned to Adam. Why don't you wait downstairs, the doctor suggested. Is she all right? Yes, I'll call you up pretty soon. Adam patted Kathy's shoulder, and she smiled at him. Dr. Tilson closed the door behind him and came back to the bed. His face was red with anger. What did you do it? Why did you do it? Kathy's mouth was a thin, tight line. Does your husband know you were pregnant? Her head moved slowly from side to side. What did you do with it? She stared up at him. He looked around the room. He stepped to the bureau and picked up a knitting needle. He shook it in her face. The old offender, the old criminal, he said, you're a fool. You nearly killed yourself and you haven't lost your baby. I suppose you took things too. Poisoned yourself, inserted camphor, kerosene, and red pepper. My God, some of the things you women will do. Her eyes were cold as glass. He pulled a chair up beside her bed. Why don't you want to have the baby? Hey, Pete. What is it? Don't be shy, Pete. We brought a new chair into the house, and Pete's all freaked out about the chair. Her eyes were as cold as glass. He pulled a chair up to her bed. Why don't you want to have the baby? He asked softly. You got a good husband. Don't you love him? Don't you intend to speak to me at all? Tell me, damn it. Don't turn mulish. Her lips did not move and her eyes did not flicker. So basically, Kathy tried to abort the baby that she was going to have with Adam. Adam doesn't know anything about this, I don't think. My dear, he said, can't you see? You must not destroy life. That's the one thing gets me crazy. God knows I lose patience because I don't know enough, but I try. I always try. And then I see deliberate killing. Kathy moistened her lip with a little pointed tongue. So we definitely see an anti-abortion sort of rhetoric with Steinbeck, which is always good. He's definitely not pro-abortion. So fast forwarding to chapter 14. So there's some tensions, obviously. I'm not sure if Adam ends up confronting Kathy yet about this. Maybe he did. So now we're back to Samuel Hamilton. Adam and Kathy settle on the Sanchez land. So Kathy doesn't really want to go out to California in the first place, but he kind of beguiles her with it and says, oh, we'll get a fresh start, yada, yada. So she relents, and they're living on this ranch that's owned by these Mexicans named the Sanchez family. So here we have some more esoteric stuff here. narrator possibly reveals himself as Olive Hamilton's daughter and Christian Science reference, esoteric, somewhere in time-ish. So because we talked a lot about the Christian, so we have another reference to not only Freemasonry and the military-industrial complex, but we also have another explanation of this Christian Science cult. Why are there so many writers that write about Freemasonry and Christian Science? Very weird. The Episcopalian minister prayed with and for me. Who are we talking about here? So I think this is the daughters of Samuel Hamilton. I guess that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Olive Hamilton now. Olive Hamilton is one of the daughters of the Hamiltons that we talked about earlier from the Salinas Valley. The Episcopalian minister prayed with and for me. The Mother Superior and nuns of the convent next to our house held me up to heaven for relief twice a day. A distant relative who was a Christian Science reader held the thought for me. Every incantation, magic, and herbal formula was brought out, and got 2 good nurses and the town's best doctors. So we have a reference to Christian Science again. We'll have to research that a little more. I'm going to fast forward here. So now we're back to Adam and Kathy. They're kind of getting settled on the Sanchez ranch. He was glad now that his father left him a rich man. In the mind, a darkness was settling over his memory of Connecticut. Perhaps the hard, flat light of the West was blotting out his birthplace. When he thought back to his father's house, to the farm, the town, to his brother's face, there was a blackness all over it, and he shook off his memories. So now we get back into Kathy's motivations of marriage and Adam here. Let's see here. Adam Trask knows some of his happiness into futures, but there was present contentment in him too. He felt his heart smack up against his throat when he saw Kathy sitting in the sun, quiet, her baby growing, and transparency to her skin that made him think of the angels of Sunday school cards. Then a breeze would move her bright hair, or she would raise her eyes, and Adam would swell out in his stomach with a pressure of ecstasy that was akin to grief. If Adam rested like a sleek, fed cat on his land, Kathy was cat-like too. She had the inhumane attribute of abandoning what she could not get and of waiting for what she could get. These 2 gifts gave her great advantage. Her pregnancy had been an accident. When her attempt to abort herself failed and the doctors threatened her, she gave up that method. This does not mean that she reconciled herself to the pregnancy. Her marriage to Adam had been the same. She was trapped and she took the best possible way out. She had not wanted to go to California either, but other plans were denied for her time being. As a very young child, she had learned to win by using the momentum of her opponent. It was easy to guide a man's strength, or it was impossible to resist him. Very few people in the world could have known that Kathy did not want to be where she was and in the condition she was. So Kathy does not want the baby. I'll put my annotation back in here. Getting towards the halfway point of the novel here, I think. So here we, let's see here. There's another character now. The next main protagonist that you need to be aware of is Lee. Now Lee is basically the Chinese servant that comes to move in to work with Adam at the Sanchez Ranch. And he sort of, the character of Lee is pretty complex, but he sort of unveils sin and religion and theology in a way that we can understand it through the viewpoints of the characters. Gotta move my coat. Pete's gonna knock it over. Pete's being a big baby right now. So we're introduced to Lee here. And then it goes back to these sprawling rhetorics about the Salinas Valley. Enter Lee, the Chinese servant of Adam. So let's see what Lee has to offer here. He says, Lee says, in a few minutes, I don't think you'll find a loose bar I've missed in a lifetime of search. I did go back to China. My father was a fairly successful man, but it didn't work. They said I looked like a foreign devil. They said I spoke like a foreign devil. I made mistakes in manners, and I didn't know delicacies that had grown up since my father left. I'm less foreign than here than I was in China. So he's talking about his struggles. Lee basically was sent over here to kind of work on the railroad during the height of the Industrial Revolution, right? Post-Civil War time period. So he has this relationship with Adam, and he's kind of like cryptic. He doesn't really say much, the Chinese servant, but when he does say something, it's pretty profound. And he sort of puts all of the questions about their lives sort of in context. That's sort of what Lee does for us. Adam says, we had a farm in Connecticut. He said, for 6 generations, we dug stones out. One of the first things I remember is sledding stones over to the walls. I thought that was the way all farms were. It's strange to me and almost sinful here. If you wanted a stone, you have to go a long way for it. So he's talking to Samuel here. Samuel Hamilton is still alive, and Samuel Hamilton is sort of like the head honcho of these farms or something like that. Let's see here. So here's another biblical reference. Look, Samuel, I mean to make, this is Adam talking to Sam. Look, Sam, I mean to make a garden of my land. Remember, my name is Adam. So far, I've had no Eden, let alone been driven out. Adam said, I won't plant apples. That would be looking for accidents. What does Eve say to that? She has a say, you remember, and Eve's delight in apples. Not this one, Adam. He's talking about Kathy here. Not this one. Adam's eyes were shining. You don't know this, Eve. She'll celebrate my choice. I don't think anyone can know her goodness. So he's completely like either in denial or just in seductive awe of Kathy. He sees nothing of her evil. So on page 171 here, we have Samuel alludes to Kathy's evil and a Freemasonic reference. Samuel said satirically, it's my duty to take this thing of yours and kick it in the face, then raise it up and spread slime on thick enough to blot out its dangerous light. His voice grew strong with vehemence. I should hold it up to you muck covered and show you its dirt and danger. He's talking about Kathy because everybody kind of knows there's something wrong with Kathy. I should warn you to look closer until you can see how ugly it really is. I should ask you to look of inconsistency and give you examples. I should give you Othello's handkerchief. Oh, I know I should, and I should straighten out your tangled thoughts, show you that the impulse is gray as lead and rotten as a dead cow in wet weather. If I did my duty well, I could give you back your bad old life and feel good about it and welcome you back into the musty membership in the lodge. So they're kind of all in the Freemasons, right? Samuel alludes to Kathy's evil and Freemasonic reference. So I think Adam was kind of disillusioned with the Freemasons. Then we get back into Lee. And this is when Lee starts to reject. And Lee starts to notice Kathy's rebellion. And Kathy says, Adam, I didn't want to come here. I am not going to stay here. As soon as I can, I will go away. He went on to Adam's dream of a garden like Eden and to Adam's adoration of Kathy. Nothing there unless his secret mind brooded over his own healed loss. But that was so long ago he had forgotten the pain. So Samuel Hamilton is kind of reflecting on the loss of his wife, right? The memory was mellow and warm and comfortable now that it was all over. His loins and his thighs had forgotten hunger. As he rode through the light and dark of tree shade and opened his mind moved on. When had the Welsh rat started crawling in his chest? He found it then, and it was Kathy, pretty, tiny, delicate Kathy. But what about her? She was silent, but many women were silent. What was it? What had it come from? He remembered that he had felt an imminence akin to the one that came to him when he held the water wand. And he remembered the shivers when the goose walked over his grave. Now he had pinned it down in time and in place and in person. It had come at dinner, and it had come with Kathy. So Samuel is very scared of Kathy as well. And now Lee starts to notice that as well, the Chinese servant. When I said, so we're on chapter 17 now, page 185. The omnipresent narrator is reflecting again. When I said Kathy was a monster, it seemed to me that it was so. Now I've bent close with a glass over the small print of her and reread the footnotes, and I wonder if it was true. The trouble that it was, since we cannot know that she wanted, we will never know whether or not she got it. Her life may have been her language, formal, developed, and indecipherable. It is easy to say she was bad, but there's little meaning unless we know why. So here we get this we get a little background on Kathy and sort of why she's evil, right? I'm not going to read all of it because I want you guys to read it yourselves. I'm going to fast forward here a little bit. Weird psychology book reference and Lee confiding to Mr. Hamilton of his fears of Kathy. I don't know what it is, but I'll tell you for a reassurance that I've got a sense of strangeness. I guess that all has to do with me, said Lee. He smiled. I'll tell you how far it went with me, though. Since I've come here, I find myself thinking of Chinese fairy tales my father told me. We Chinese have a well-developed demonology. So here's another esoteric thing, talking about demonology. You think she is a demon? Of course not, said Lee. I hope I'm a little beyond such silliness. I don't know what it is. You know, Mr. Hamilton. So he's talking to Mr. Hamilton here. A servant develops the ability to taste the wind and judge the climate of the house he works in. And there is a strangeness here. Maybe that's what makes me remember my father's demon. So Lee is growing very, very disillusioned with Kathy. So now Kathy gives birth to Adam and her son, right? Let's see here. Samuel comes to watch over Kathy while she's giving birth. Samuel said pleasantly, "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Adam's voice was hoarse. Adam's sitting there with her. She doesn't want the light. It hurts her eyes. So maybe, definitely we have this reference to the light versus the darkness. Samuel walked into the room, and the authority grew in him with each step. There will have to be light, he said. She can close her eyes. I'll tie a black cloth over them if she wants. He had not looked at her until now, and he saw a true hatred in her eyes, unforgiving, murderous hatred. I'll be over here before long, dearie. Now tell me, has the water broke? Her hostile eyes glared at him, and her lips raised, snarling from her little teeth. She did not answer him. So light hurts Kathy. So Kathy's giving a baby, but she's not happy about it. That does not sound like a mother that wants to give birth at all, right? Let's see here. So for some reason, Kathy's got sharp teeth. She's almost like a vampire or something. Her head jerked up, and her sharp teeth fastened on his hands across from the back and up until the palm near the little finger. He cried out in pain and tried to pull his hand away, but her jaw was set. So this is... Who is this? Let's see here. So I think this is Adam. Yeah, Adam is trying to sort of help her with her delivery of the baby. She ends up attacking him. Her head jerked up and her sharp teeth fastened on his hand across the back and up into the palm near the little finger. He cried out in pain and tried to pull his hand away, but her jaw was set and her head twisted and turned, mangling his hand the way of a terrier worries a sack. A shrill snarling came from her set teeth. He slapped her on the cheek, and it had no effect. Automatically, he did what he would have done to stop a dog fight. His left hand went to her throat, and he cut off her wind. She struggled and tore at his hand before her jaws unclenched, and he pulled her hand free. The flesh was torn and bleeding. He stepped back from the bed and looked at the damage her teeth had done. He looked at her with fear, and when he looked, her face was calm and young and innocent. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." Oh, so this is Samuel. I'm sorry, it's not Adam, it's Samuel. She attacked Samuel. Samuel laughed shortly. "I have to muzzle you, I guess. A collie dog did the same to me once." Samuel told Adam afterwards, "She must be made of whalebone. The birth happened before I was ready. Popped out like a seed. I'd not the water ready to wash him. Why, she didn't even touch the pulling rope to bear down. Pure whalebone she is." He tore at the door, called Lee, and demanded warm water. Adam came charging into the room. "A boy?" Samuel cried. "You've got a boy, easy," he said, for Adam had seen the mess in the bed, and a green was rising in his face. "Send Lee in here, and you, Adam, if you still have the authority to tell your hands and feet what to do, get the kitchen and make some coffee." So the baby is now delivered. Let's see here. So now she not only delivers one baby, she delivers two babies. So they're basically having twins. And I think they're paternal. They're the twins that don't look alike. I can't remember if that's paternal or whatever, but they don't look alike. Samuel cleaned the mother and shifted her gently while he changed the linen on the bed. He found himself reluctant to look into her face. Her golden hair was wet with the perspiration, but her face had changed. It was stony, expressionless, and at her throat the pulse fluttered visibly. "You have 2 sons," Samuel said. "2 fine sons. They aren't alike, each one born separate in his own sack." She inspected him coldly, without interest. Samuel said, "I'll show you the boys to you." "No," she said, without emphasis. "Now, dearie, don't you want to see your sons?" "No, I don't want them." So she's rejecting her own twins. "Oh, you'll change. You're tired now, but you'll change. And I'll tell you, this birth was quicker and easier than I've ever seen in my life." Her eyes moved from his face. "I don't want them. I want you to cover the windows and take the light away. It's weariness. In a few days, you'll feel so different from now you won't remember." "I'll remember. Go away. Take them out of the room. Send Adam in." Samuel was caught by her tone. There was no sickness, no weariness, no softness. Her words came out without his will. "I don't like you," he said, and wished he could gather the words back into his throat and into his mind. But his words had no effect on Kathy. "Send Adam in," she said. Let me see here. Lee brought coffee to Samuel. "There's a bad-looking hand you have there," he said. "I know. I'm afraid it's going to give me trouble." "Why did she do it?" "I don't know. She's a strange thing." Lee said, "Mr. Hamilton, let me take care of it. You could lose an arm." The life went out of Samuel. "Do you want, Lee? Do what you want, Lee. A frightened sorrow has closed down over my heart. I wish I were a child so I could cry. I'm too old to be afraid like this, and I've not felt such despair since a bird died in my hand by a flowering water long ago." Lee left the room and shortly returned, carrying the small ebony box carved with twisting dragons. So we sort of have this illusion of the Chinese philosophy of the dragons mixed with the juxtaposition of the serpent, the demonic serpent from the Bible. Kathy says again, "Shut the door. I do not want the light. Adam, go out. I want to be in the dark, alone." Adam said hoarsely, "I want to stay with you." "I do not want you." "I will stay." "Then stay, but don't talk anymore. Please close the door and take the lamp away." So she's rejecting not only her baby, but she's rejecting the love from her husband, Adam, right? So now we have this Liza character that comes to the Trask house to sort of help out. And we have some more language between Lee, the Chinese servant, and Samuel. For a week, Kathy rested and gathered her strength. On Saturday morning of the second week of October, she stayed in her bedroom all morning. Adam tried the door and found it locked. "I'm busy," she called, and he went away, putting her bureau in the order he thought, for he could hear her opening the doors and closing them. In the late afternoon, Lee came to Adam where he sat on the stoop. "Missy, may I go King City buy nursie bottle?" he said uneasily. "Well, do it then," said Adam. "She's your mistress. Missy may not come back, maybe Monday." Let's see here. Kathy spoke calmly down the doorway. "He hasn't had a day off for a long time. A rest would do him good." So Kathy is basically trying to take off on Adam. She's trying to skip house. She's trying to leave. Kathy went to her room and the evening came down. At 7:30, Adam knocked. "I've got you some supper, dear. It's not much." The door opened as though she had been standing waiting. She was dressed in her neat traveling dress, the jacket edged in black braid, black velvet lapels, and large jet bottoms. On her hand was a wide straw hat with a tiny crown, long jet beaded hat pins held on. Adam's mouth dropped open. She gave him no chance to speak. "I'm going away now," she said. "Kathy, what do you mean? I told you before." "No, you didn't. You didn't listen. It doesn't matter. I don't believe you." Her voice was dead and metallic. "I don't give a damn what you believe. I'm going." "The babies," he said. "Throw them in one of your wells." He cried in panic. "Kathy, you're sick. You can't go. Not for me. Not for me. I can do anything to you. Any woman can do anything to you. You're a fool." The word got through his haze. Without warning, his hand reached to her shoulder and then he thrust her backward. As she staggered, he took the key from her inside the door, slammed the door shut, and locked it. He stood panting, his ear close to the panel, and a hysterical sickness poisoned him. He could hear her moving quietly about. A drawer was open, and the thought leaped in him, "She's going to stay." And then there was a little click he could not place. So he bolts down the door. His hand trembled, trying to turn the key, and it fell onto the floor after he had turned it. He pushed the door open. She stood 3 feet away. In her right hand, she held his .44 Colt, and the black hole in the barrel pointed at him. He took a step toward her, saw that the hammer was back. She shot him. The heavy slug struck him in the shoulder and flattened and tore out a piece of his shoulder blade. He heard her steps on the... So she basically shoots him. He's lying on the ground. He's about to be passed out. He heard her steps on the porch on a crispy dark oak leaves on the path, and then he could hear her no more. So Kathy took off. She's gone. She doesn't want her baby. She doesn't want anything to do with Adam. Adam lay in a 4-poster bed where the twins had been born. He was propped high with pillows, and a mound of home-devised bandages covered his left breast and shoulder. The room reeked of Hall's cream salve. Now, basically, the sheriff comes to confront Adam, is asking him, like, what the hell took place. Adam says, I was cleaning my gun, and the gun went off. He's keeping the crime a secret. What happened to Mr. Trask? Tell me what happened. My wife is away on a visit, Adam says. She wasn't here when it happened. Now, they all know he's lying just because of the situation. You know, they show up, and his wife's gone. She just had 2 babies. So something's not adding up. I want you to tell me what happened. This isn't nosiness. This is the law. Now, damn it, you open your eyes and tell me, or by Christ, I'll take you into the sheriff, even if you are hurt. So I wrote down at the bottom, Adam is a total cuck. Because he really is. Like, his wife just tried to kill him, and he's still, like, head over heels for her. I'm going to fast forward here. So now we're about halfway through the novel now on page 215. We might have to break this into 2 parts because this is going to be a really, really long video. So I think we will stop at that. We'll stop on page 15. Make sure you guys stay tuned for the next installment. We'll probably be able to wrap it up at least in another hour. So hope you guys did enjoy this, and this will be part 1 of East of Eden analysis, and we'll check back on part 2 very soon.